The village of Riverton was nestled deep in the mountains, surrounded by thick forests and snow-covered terrain. It was a quiet place, far from the bustle of the city, where life moved slowly. The villagers had learned to adapt to the harsh winters and lived off the land, but the cold season was always a reminder of the fragility of life. It was during this bitterly cold winter that something unimaginable happened, a sight that would haunt the villagers forever. It was nearing dusk when Elena, the village's head, heard a strange noise. It wasn't the wind howling through the trees or the usual sounds of the forest animals. It was a soft, desperate knocking on the village gate. Elena, bundled in a thick coat, stood frozen for a moment. Her heart raced as she looked out the window into the fading daylight. No one ever came to the village gate at this hour. The villagers kept to themselves, only leaving for the essentials. Curiosity and concern drove her to the door. She opened it cautiously, her eyes scanning the snow-covered path. The cold air hit her face, biting at her skin, but it was what she saw that made her freeze in her tracks. There, standing at the gate, was a bear, its large body trembling in the freezing cold. But what made it even more shocking was the condition of the creature. The bear, a massive grizzly, was almost unrecognizable. Its fur was matted and caked with snow and ice, its body emaciated, the ribs visible beneath its thick coat of fur. The bear was starving, barely able to stand. Its eyes, once fierce and wild, were dull and desperate. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen a bear like this before, and she had lived her whole life in these mountains. The bear's eyes met hers for a moment, and in that brief glance, Elena saw suffering, a suffering that went beyond hunger. There was desperation in the way the bear looked at her, a silent plea for help. The bear let out a soft, low growl, but it was not a threat. It was as though it was trying to communicate its pain, as if it understood that it had reached the end of its strength and that there was no more it could do to survive. The villagers had heard of bears coming close to the settlement before, but they had never seen one in this state. Elena knew this was different. Without thinking, she stepped closer, carefully moving around the door, trying not to alarm the bear. The creature seemed too weak to act aggressively, but Elena was still cautious. She had always been taught to respect the wild, to never let her guard down around animals that could turn violent in an instant. But this was different. This bear wasn't looking to attack. It was looking for help. "Easy, girl," Elena whispered softly, trying to soothe the bear. The bear's eyes followed her, and it took a small step forward. It wasn't aggressive. It was broken. Elena's heart softened. She had to act quickly before the cold finished what hunger had begun. The bear stumbled forward, its legs buckling slightly as it moved. Elena didn't hesitate. She ran inside, calling to the others in the village. "We need to help it," she said urgently. Within moments, a group of villagers had gathered around the gate. They stood in awe, shocked by the sight of the bear. No one had ever seen an animal in such a state, but Elena knew what had to be done. The starving bear had made it to them, and she wasn't going to let it die in the cold. Elena led the bear inside the warmth of her cabin. The villagers followed closely behind, ready to help however they could. The first task was to get the bear warm. Elena quickly built a fire in the hearth, and the villagers began to fetch blankets and food. The bear's breathing was shallow, and it seemed to have little strength left. As the fire crackled, Elena carefully placed the bear near it, hoping the warmth would bring it back to life. She used whatever food she could find, making a small meal of meat and broth, trying to feed the bear. She knew that it would take time for the bear to recover, but she also knew that they had no time to waste. The night was closing in, and if the bear didn't eat, it would surely die. The villagers worked together, pouring their hearts into saving this creature. They gathered herbs to soothe its wounds and gave it the care it needed. But there was something more to this. Elena could feel it. The bear had brought something with it. Something. As the night wore on, Elena watched over the bear with increasing concern. Her body had warmed up, and her breathing had steadied, but something about the way the bear looked at her still unnerved Elena. It wasn't just hunger that had driven the bear to her door. It was something more primal, something that went beyond survival. Hours passed and the bear began to stir. Its eyes opened and it let out a low growl, not of pain but of recognition. Elena was startled for a moment, but she stood still, not wanting to disturb the creature. The bear looked at her with a certain awareness, a deep, knowing look that seemed almost human. The villagers had been standing back, allowing Elena to take the lead. But now one of them, Thomas, spoke up. He was an older man, a hunter who had seen the wild in ways most people never could. He stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on the bear. "It's pregnant," he said quietly, looking at Elena. "That's why she was so weak." Elena turned to him, surprised. She had noticed the bear's belly earlier, but she hadn't realized what it meant. It was a startling revelation. The bear had been starving, not only for itself, but for her cubs as well. The urgency of her condition was now even clearer. She had cubs to protect, cubs that she couldn't even carry anymore. As the realization hit Elena, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. This bear had not only brought herself to their door, she had brought her future. The villagers' compassion now had to extend beyond saving the bear. They had to make sure she could give birth, that the cubs would be healthy. The next few days were a blur of activity. Elena and the others worked tirelessly to care for the mother bear. They fed her nourishing food and provided her with warmth, trying to restore her strength. But as the days passed, Elena's concern grew. The bear still hadn't given birth, and her body seemed to be fighting against the recovery. Something was wrong. Then on the third night, as a full moon illuminated the forest outside, something extraordinary happened. The bear gave birth to two tiny cubs, fragile, weak, but alive. The sound of the cubs' first breaths filled the cabin, and for a moment the room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The mother bear, despite her exhaustion, gently nuzzled her cubs, her instincts kicking in. Elena stood in awe, watching the delicate bond between the mother and her cubs form. It was a moment of pure nature, and the village would never be the same. But there was still something else. The villagers couldn't ignore the fact that the bear had made a choice to seek help. They couldn't help but wonder why she had come to them in her most vulnerable state. As they watched the mother and cubs grow stronger each day, they realized the bear had come not just for survival, but for something deeper, a bond forged in compassion and survival.